end up becoming the foundation of international law that's still being applied to us today. Not just there, but in many other nations, and just, you know, the way in which it, you know, our story, when we talk about these, it's so important for us to talk about this history because it connects us. You know, my story as an Aotearoa woman who is really just trying to live on my land, on my whenua, raise my kids on my whenua and pass on our legacy of our tipuna without having our waters be polluted, without having our coastline be polluted, and still be able to grow kai and access Aotearoa and all of that. That's really all we're trying to do. And that story, the difficulty and the barriers that are put up in that story, there's a connection to my brothers that have been driven out of their lands in Africa. You know, there's a connection to our whānau who are getting their noses cracked on the tarmac in Hong Kong. There's a connection to my sister on Mauna Kea. There's a connection right around the world to all of these stories of dispossession and injustice, and it's really important for us to understand those aspects of it, particularly because, you know, we hear our own talking about, you know, the influx of, we've got to close the gates until we sort out what's going on. We've got our own people to look after. It's the same story, it's the same story of what's happened to drive whānau from one part of the world here is the same story as what's driving our dispossession on our own lands as well. And it takes these discussions, it takes this uncovering of history for us to be able to see the connections across those places to become the best kinds of allies for each other as well. And there's so much promise in that for all of us. Māori mai, Pākehā mai, Tangata Moana mai, whoever, you know, there's so much promise in us. And Steve Newcomb, who I mentioned earlier, often one of the most poignant and powerful things that I've read of his writings is that he says, you know, if we can't overcome this idea of entitlement around how we treat each other, that is exemplified in the Doctrines of Discovery, if we can't dismantle that and change how we treat each other, we are never going to be treating the planet the way that she needs to be treated in order for us all to have a future. So we need to really unpick this idea of entitlement upon people in place for all of us, for everybody's, you know. And I think, you know, what we're saying is it's not just a job for settler colonialists, it's a job for all of us to understand and unpick in terms of how we treat each other. I'll give you the mic now. Thanks.
Kia ora tātou. It's not finished, so there will be more kōrero, but I firstly just really want to mihi to all of you for the knowledge that you have brought here, and also mihi to all of your tupuna, your ancestors, who have put you on this path to where you are now and to be here in this room. I've been thinking a lot about the quote from Featherston. Anybody know Featherston Street in the city? Yeah, so one of the quotes that he's attributed to, and you probably would have heard it, it's quite famous. He is said to have said in 1856, "The Māoris are dying out and nothing can save them. Our plain duty as good, compassionate colonists is to smooth down their dying pillow. Then history will have nothing to reproach us with." And the reason that I'm saying that is because in 1856, colonisers really believed, and obviously really desired it so, that Indigenous people would no longer exist here, and due to that entitlement, they would then inherit our lands, our moana, our everything, and they were just happy to smooth the pillow. You know, I would have thought a kind, compassionate response would have been, "Oh shit, mate, like there's some people dying here and they're actually from here and we really care about them. Maybe we should, I don't know, throw the pillow out and throw it a lifeline." But no, the answer was to aid them in their deaths, in their genocide, to cause it. So in saying that, I want to acknowledge that because by that vision of a man in a leadership position who a famous street is named after down in the city, which many of us might walk to or through around when we might go to work, by his vision, none of us would be sitting here right now. Many of us would not even be in this room, let alone telling these stories, speaking these truths, sharing these narratives that we are sharing here today. So I think that I just want to honour that, because in that vision, our ancestors have worked really hard to make sure that it didn't come to life, and it is actually quite incredible and quite precious that we are all here right now today.
Kia ora.
I've been really lucky to be working with an awesome group of mostly young people called Pōneke Solidarity Alliance, Ihu Mātau. And together we have been organising actions to be able to support Ihu Mātau, which is obviously another taki, another interconnected struggle along these lines, and some of the people in that group have helped put on tonight. And one of the ideas that have been guiding us, thanks to our kuia Wetewete who is sitting here and who opened us with that beautiful karakia, is the idea of mahara. And the whakaaro behind that we have been talking about is, when asked, and I may not do this justice, aroha mai whaia, but the idea being that the question was asked, what is psychology for Māori, right? What is the realm of psychology? And the answer was mahara, which many people might know as memory. But when brought together those two words, the hara is the issue, the take, the error, the mistake, the wrong, the injustice, and the ma is the light, it is the healing, it is the love, it is the justice that comes through. But actually we need to work through both of those things, and we need to sit and be in the hara to be able to also know the ma and to bring the ma out as well. So in this moment, I invite you to exist within that ma and that hara, and if anyone here has any response, question, a whakaaro that they want to bring forward, we can send a mic around. It's really important you speak into the mic because we have a lot of beautiful participants on our Zoom who are watching as well, kia ora tātou, and they need to hear us through the mic. But if you could just be with that, the mahara, and respond in that moment to the incredible whakaaro that has been put down here, please do. And also in saying that, I will repeat the tikanga earlier before. It's important that we make the most out of this time. I would love to hear your activist CV or your whichever CV after the week, but in this moment, I don't know my whānau, but I think it's really important to focus on what's happening here and to make the most out of the time for the speakers, because it is a rare and precious moment. So, I've just probably scared everyone off. But does anyone have a whakaaro that they would like to share?
Komona Jackson aho ko Ngāti Porou, me Ngāti Kahungunu. Thank you so much for tonight. I'd just like to add a couple of things. I don't have a question, but some comments. The first is to pick up on Tina's point, which I think is really important, and that's not to see the doctrine of discovery as some historical artefact, that everything that happens within Pākehā law in New Zealand flows from the doctrine of discovery, and the presumption that any rights which Indigenous peoples may have in the coloniser's law are necessarily lesser rights than those claimed by the colonisers. And round about the time that the doctrine of discovery was being extended into Indigenous lands after Columbus stumbled into the Caribbean, there was a very famous and I think really important debate held in Europe in the city of Valladolid in Spain, which was in the capital of Castile. And the King of Castile called together the greatest canon lawyers in Europe to discuss whether Indigenous peoples were human. And the debate continued for 3 years, and the purpose of the debate had 2 parts. That if it could be established that Indigenous peoples were not human, then they could be killed with just cause. There was no need to even allow them to live. And the priest lawyer who was charged with leading that side of the debate was a priest called Lawson-Te. And he argued that Indigenous peoples were naturally inferior to Europeans as monkeys are to humans and women are to men. And because they are naturally inferior, they may be killed wantonly. The other side of the debate was led by another canon lawyer called Papatūānuku, who said, well, that's not really true. Indigenous peoples are human, but they are lesser humans. And therefore we should treat them with kindness and generosity. So we can still kill them, but we should kill them with cultural sensitivity. And from that debate developed all of the basis of what is now treaty law in this country, that Indigenous peoples, if they are to live, have necessarily lesser rights. And so you'll hear Pākehā lawyers talk a lot about Aboriginal rights and native title. Those are rights that are necessarily inferior to those of the coloniser. And so that debate is part of that whole discourse that the panel was talking about. There's a whole secret sequence of events which still play out today. And so the debate around the Humatao is not about justice from the point of view of the Crown. It's a debate about how we preserve our superior authority to determine what should happen to land. And why I think it's so important to have hui like this is not just so that we learn the history, but we learn how the history plays out still today. But if you go to a law school in New Zealand, you won't hear that history. You'll learn about what a wonderful thing native title is, what a wonderful thing Aboriginal rights are, but you won't learn about the philosophical underpinnings which defines them as necessarily lesser rights. And so what Featherston said about smoothing the pillow of the dying race, that's a product of that long history. They had this belief that they were superior, and is the basis of colonisation. And the other thing I'd like just to point on, because a number of you on the panel use the term, and I actually personally find it really problematic, and that's the term settler colonialism. That term was invented by colonisers. And settle is a really interesting word. You know, when a child is playing up, you say, oh, settle down. It's a calming word. It's a calming term. But when the colonisers came here to settle, they came to unsettle the Indigenous peoples. And by labelling themselves as settlers,